Every shadow has a secret and a story to tell. Welcome to Mr. Night Shadows.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Mr. Night Shadows' Bedtime Stories. The aim of this series is to help create a relaxing atmosphere around you for better sleep. If you are seeking a full night's rest, I recommend one of my extended playlists. Now, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. You know, after 25 years on the road, I thought I'd seen it all. Rain, snow, sleet, angry drivers, even a runaway bull once. But there's one trip I can't shake, one job that nearly put me under the ground. It all started with a call I shouldn't have answered. The dispatcher was some guy I barely knew. Said his name was Jack. Never heard of him before, never heard of him since. It was late one night, and I was having a few beers at a bar up near Anchorage. The guy said he had a high-paying job, urgent. A delivery to a place called Paradise Point, deep in the Alaskan wilderness. And he'd pay double if I could get it there by dawn. I'll be honest, I needed the money. There were bills, and my daughter had a surgery coming up I could barely afford. So, I took the job. Figured I'd drive a few hours, drop off the load, and be back before the sun was up. But I'd never heard of Paradise Point, and when I asked around, nobody else had either. Should have been my first sign. I headed out around midnight. The truck loaded up, the air clear and cold as a glacier. The farther I drove, the thinner the road got. Just snow-draped evergreens, narrowing until they were close enough to scrape the sides of the truck. Felt like the trees themselves were closing in, trying to keep me from passing through. 2 hours in, my radio crackled with static. I tried tuning it, but every station was nothing but white noise. Then I heard a sound, faint at first, a deep rhythmic thumping echoing from somewhere outside the truck. Maybe an animal, or so I told myself. I kept driving, but the sound, it kept pace with me, no matter how fast I went. Then, just for a second, I caught something in my side mirror. A tall, dark figure standing right in the middle of the road behind me. Perfectly still, just staring. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just snow, stretching out as far as I could see. I was spooked, but I told myself it was just shadows and exhaustion. I kept my eyes on the road, but that thumping sound wouldn't stop. A few miles later, I had to pull over, if only to clear my head. I got out and stretched, breathing in that sharp, freezing air. I went around to check the cargo, making sure everything was secure. But something else caught my attention. Footprints. Huge clawed prints in the snow, leading right up to the edge of the woods. They were fresh too, bigger than any animal I'd seen up here. I'd like to say I shrugged it off, but the truth is, I started to feel like I wasn't alone. When I got back into the truck, the radio popped back on with a jolt. Only this time, it wasn't static. It was my own voice. "Turn back now. Turn back," it whispered, just like I was hearing my own thoughts out loud. But I hadn't said a word. And then, just as suddenly, it went silent. I kept pushing forward, partly out of fear, partly out of stubbornness. I figured it was just one last haul, one night out, and I'd have a nice fat paycheck. "Just keep driving, Rick," I told myself. That was the last sane thought I remember. About 4 hours in, I finally spotted it. A weathered old sign poking out of the snow with the words Paradise Point, scratched into the wood, barely visible, but there. That place felt wrong somehow. I can't explain it, but every instinct I had told me to turn around. But that job, that money, it pulled me forward, like a hook digging into my gut. As I pulled up to what looked like an old clearing, the truck stalled out. Engine dead, lights dead, everything. I tried turning the key, nothing. It was as if the truck had died the moment I crossed into that place. Then the thumping started again, louder this time, like something slamming against the truck's undercarriage. It was coming from all sides, as if something massive was circling me, testing the walls. I looked in my rearview mirror and, God, I wish I hadn't. There was something moving in the bed of my truck, a dark shape shifting in the shadows just beyond my view. And then, an eye, just one, bloodshot, staring right back at me. My heart was pounding so loud I couldn't even hear the thumping anymore. I knew, somehow, that if I stayed there, whatever was out there would find its way in. I made the only choice I could. I grabbed my coat, left the truck, and ran into the woods, stumbling through the snow. I didn't care where I was going, I just wanted to put distance between me and that thing. I could hear it behind me, crunching through the snow, breathing, close enough I could feel its freezing breath on my neck. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs gave out, and my body felt like it was turning to ice. And just when I thought I was done for, I saw headlights. A lone trucker on the road. He stopped, got out, and pulled me into his cab. The last thing I remember is looking over my shoulder and seeing nothing. Just darkness swallowing up my truck. I woke up in a hospital bed, frostbitten and half dead. The doctors said I was lucky they'd found me. Lucky. If they only knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt that night. I don't think they'd call it luck. A week later I went to retrieve my truck, but they couldn't find it. Just a stretch of undisturbed snow where it should have been, like it had never been there at all. And Paradise Point? It doesn't show up on any maps, not a single trace. I asked around, but all I got were nervous looks and muttered warnings about some cursed logging road that locals avoid like the plague. Look, I'm not one to scare easily. Been driving trucks part-time for years, and I've had my fair share of strange encounters. But there's one road that I can't shake. Highway 281 down in Texas. Now, if you know anything about that stretch, you know it's long, empty, and not the kind of place you want to get stuck alone at night. But one night, about a month back, I saw something, or more like someone. And to this day, I still don't know what it was. All I know is that I won't ever drive that road again. That night started like any other. I'd been driving for a few hours, taking a late-night haul to make some extra cash. Highway 281 was my usual route, and normally I didn't think twice about it. You could go miles without seeing another car, just miles of flat land, shadows flickering past under the headlights. Then I saw her, just off the side of the road in the beam of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, maybe stranded. A woman standing in the dust by the road, wearing what looked like a dress. Something old-fashioned, like from another era. She raised her arm as if to wave me down, but there was something in her face. Blank. Like she wasn't even looking at me. I kept driving, telling myself I'd imagined it. But even as I sped up, my gut wouldn't settle. The road stretched out in front of me, silent and empty, but I kept checking my mirrors, almost like I half expected to see her in the back seat. Stupid, right? Still, the thought stayed with me all night. The next night I took the same route again. I told myself it was just exhaustion that made me see things. But then, just around the same mile marker, there she was again. Same woman. Same clothes. Same blank stare. Only this time, she was standing a little closer to the road. I slowed down just enough to get a better look, but a shiver ran down my spine, like every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to stop. I don't know why, but I floored it, leaving her behind in the dust. I felt wrong, like I'd passed something I wasn't meant to see, and as I kept driving, I noticed my headlights flickering. Just a bit. The dashboard lights, too, like something was messing with the truck's power. But I tried not to think about it. Chalked it up to a faulty fuse, maybe. The third night, I was starting to dread Highway 281, but I couldn't afford to take a longer route, so I steeled myself and set off, telling myself she wouldn't be there. But she was. This time, she was standing right in the middle of the road. I had to swerve, nearly ran off into the ditch to avoid hitting her. In the split second she was in my headlights, I swear I saw her face, those empty eyes staring right through me. I was shaking as I drove off, and then the CB crackled to life. It had been silent all night, but now there was this faint whispering, static mixed with broken words. I leaned closer, hoping to catch something, and clear as day I heard it. "Don't leave me here." I didn't stop to figure out where the voice was coming from. I just kept driving, faster than ever, heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out that voice. But those words kept repeating in my head all night. "Don't leave me here." By now I wanted nothing more to do with that road, but I couldn't afford to pass up the job. So, against my better judgment, I took Highway 281 again. And this time, I felt her presence before I even saw her. It was like the whole truck got colder, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Then, I made the mistake of glancing in the rearview mirror. She was there, in my truck. Sitting in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. My heart froze. I didn't know what to do. I swerved to the side of the road and scrambled out of the truck, gasping for air. But when I looked back, the seat was empty. I didn't care about the job. I just wanted out. Since then, I haven't seen her. I stopped taking Highway 281, found work on routes farther north. I choose to protect my sanity above anything else. They say there are things out there on the road that don't make sense. Things you can't explain. I used to laugh at those stories. Thought they were all just trucker tales. Until last year, when I took the wrong exit on I-95. I haven't been back on that stretch since. It was a late-night haul through the Appalachians, and I was running late. My dispatcher had warned me the client was paying top dollar, but only if I made it by sunrise. The route was familiar, and I was making good time, but then I saw it. A sign on the side of the road, something I'd never seen before. It was just a simple wooden sign with a black horse painted on it. No exit number, no mile marker. It was strange, yeah, but I didn't think much of it at first. In fact, it almost felt familiar, like it was calling to me. Figured it might be some kind of shortcut, so I took it, telling myself it would shave a few minutes off my time. Biggest mistake of my life. The road was narrow, just a single muddy track winding into the trees. I expected it to reconnect to the highway, but the farther I went, the more it twisted, cutting deeper into the forest. My GPS went haywire, freezing up, and then my phone lost signal. It was dark, pitch black without the headlights, and the trees pressed in on either side, their branches scratching against the truck like claws. I'd gone too far to turn around, so I kept going, trying to shake off this nagging feeling that I wasn't alone out there. Then the headlights started flickering. Just a little at first, like a loose bulb. But each time they went out, the darkness felt alive, like it was pressing in around me, getting closer. Then, in my side mirror, I caught something. Headlights behind me, a truck coming up fast. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone out here after all. But as the truck got closer, I realized something was wrong. It looked exactly like mine. Same model, same color, even the same dent in the rear bumper. I thought I was seeing things, but as it pulled up beside me, I couldn't deny it. This truck was identical to mine, down to the license plate. My stomach dropped. I glanced over, and in that split second I saw the driver. It was me. I swear I was looking right at myself, sitting there in the cab of that other truck. Same clothes, same expression. But his eyes, they were empty, cold, like he wasn't even alive. I jerked the wheel, heart pounding, trying to get away from that thing. But every time I sped up, he did too, matching me perfectly, like we were stuck in some twisted mirror. Then he turned to look at me. Really looked. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like staring into my own death. Every fear I'd ever had coming alive right there in his eyes. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the mirrors started flickering, flashing images at me. Memories I'd buried, mistakes I'd made, regrets that still haunted me. All flashing by, like he was showing me every dark part of myself. I was trapped. Every time I tried to pull away, he was right there, staring back at me, unblinking. It felt like he was daring me to stop, daring me to let him in. I didn't know what else to do, so I floored it, hoping to outrun him. But the other truck stayed right beside me, our engines roaring together in perfect sync. I knew then that there was only one way out. I slammed on the brakes, hoping he'd keep going. But he stopped too. The other truck didn't even lurch, just came to a perfect stop, like he'd known I'd do it. I was at my breaking point, panic creeping up, knowing I had to do something drastic, something that didn't make sense. So, I turned the wheel hard and veered off the road, crashing through the trees, branches tearing at the truck, scraping metal, the whole rig shuddering as I plowed through the forest. I didn't care if I wrecked. I just needed to get away from him, from whatever nightmare I'd fallen into. Finally, I broke through the trees and found myself back on the main highway, headlights blinding in the open air. I pulled to the side of the road panting, hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. My GPS came back on, the radio crackled with static, and I was flooded with a wave of relief. The Black Horse Road was gone. No sign of it. No sign of him. I don't remember how long I sat there, catching my breath, trying to make sense of what just happened. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. God kept me safe. I was able to finish the job, got the delivery there before dawn. But I didn't take that route again. Never. You know, when you've been driving trucks as long as I have, you get used to the quiet out on those long stretches of road. That dead silence, with nothing but the hum of the engine and a few desert stars above, can feel like a friend. But one night on the border, that silence turned into something else. And it changed everything for me. I was hauling machinery down to a little desert town near the US-Mexico border. I'd done that route dozens of times. Nothing out there except a few coyotes, maybe some border patrol trucks now and then. That night, the CB radio was my only company. When you're out there, you keep it on, just in case. But a couple hours into the trip, I started hearing something strange. Faint, scratchy static. I thought maybe another driver was trying to reach me, but then I realized it was coming from an unused channel. Nobody was on that frequency. And then I heard it. Just one word. Marco. My own name, whispered like a breath through the static. Now, I'll be the first to say there are weird frequencies out in the desert, echoes from other radios, maybe stray signals bouncing around. But this was different. It sounded familiar, like my own voice, distorted and far away. I shrugged it off, though, tried to laugh it away, told myself it was just a glitch, maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But it left me uneasy, like something had crawled into my head and wouldn't leave. A little while later, that same static crackled through the CB again. But this time, the voice wasn't just calling my name. It was whispering things, fragments of words mixed with static, but things it couldn't know. Remember, the crash, it whispered, faint but clear. I froze. That accident happened years ago. Only a few close friends even knew about it. I checked the channel thinking maybe someone was pulling a prank. But who could know that? I hadn't told a soul on the road. Then, like it was answering my thoughts, the voice repeated. Remember, the crash, the rain. In a broken, haunting tone, it was so familiar, like I was talking to myself. By now, my hands were shaking. I tried switching off the radio, hoping that would end it. But the quiet that followed felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. The road ahead stretched on, empty and endless, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I decided to turn the CB back on, hoping whatever it was had stopped. For a while I drove in silence, but just as I was beginning to calm down, the static returned, louder this time, crackling like a bad connection. And then the voice said something that sent a chill through me. You can't escape. The voice was closer, clearer, and then I felt it. An urge, almost like a physical pull, drawing me off the road toward the desert, toward the empty, nothing stretching out on either side of me. My hands twitched on the wheel, the urge getting stronger. I had to fight it just to keep the truck steady. Suddenly, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. I felt this strange relief. Another driver, someone who might snap me out of this nightmare. But as the vehicle got closer, it started matching my every move, staying just a few feet behind, its lights glaring through my cab. Then, my CB crackled again, that same voice, whispering louder this time. You can't run from yourself, Marco. I glanced in the mirror, and in that flash, I saw the driver behind me. Or I should say, I didn't see him. There was no one in that seat. The truck was empty, but it followed me perfectly, weaving with every turn, speeding up when I sped up, slowing down when I did. By now, my heart was pounding, my throat dry. I pulled over, hoping the other truck would just pass, that this whole thing would end. But instead, the lights behind me flicked off, leaving me in pitch-black darkness. And then, just as I thought I was safe, the CB went dead. No static, no voice, just silence. But that silence, it wasn't right. It felt like something was watching me, studying me. I stepped out, hoping the cool air would clear my head, But the moment I got outside, I saw something that stopped me cold. There were footprints in the sand. My footprints, circling around the truck, like I'd been pacing there all night, though I knew I hadn't left the cab. The CB popped back on with a jolt, and a new voice, calmer, but no less eerie, came through. "Keep driving, Marco. Don't look back." I scrambled back into the cab, threw it in gear, and drove like hell, too terrified to even check the mirror. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care, as long as I was putting miles between me and that voice. I drove until the sky started to lighten, until I finally felt like I could breathe again. As dawn broke, I saw a truck on the side of the road abandoned. I slowed down out of curiosity, but as I passed, something caught my eye. It was an old, rusted CB radio, dangling from the dash, shattered, wires frayed. And then it hit me. That truck looked just like mine. I sped up, pushing the memory away, telling myself it was just another coincidence. But something in me knew that truck was mine. Or maybe a version of mine, a version of me that hadn't made it out of that desert. I made it to the town later that morning, completed the delivery, but I was done. Told my boss I wasn't taking any more jobs along that stretch of road. That ugly experience was enough for me to make that decision without thinking twice. Honestly, I used to think of myself as a practical guy. I'm not the type to jump at shadows or believe in ghost stories, but there's something about the open road. Something about the empty, endless stretch of desert at night that changes things. It was supposed to be an easy drive. My first solo long-haul trip through the Arizona desert. I'd been looking forward to it, too. The night was clear. The route was quiet, and I thought it would just be me, my truck, and a long stretch of highway. But I was wrong. It wasn't just me out there. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I first noticed it. I was checking my mirrors, just making sure everything was clear behind me. And for a second, I thought I saw someone. A woman, standing by the side of the road out there in the middle of nowhere. She was just there. A pale figure against the dark, her clothes kind of old-fashioned, like something out of a different era. I figured I was just tired, maybe seeing things. Just a trick of the desert shadows, right? I shook it off, tried to focus on the road, but something about her stuck with me. The way she'd been standing, not waving or looking for help. Just staring, like she was waiting for something. A few minutes later, I checked my mirror again, and my stomach dropped. This time, she wasn't standing on the side of the road. She was in the bed of my truck. I only caught a glimpse. Her face was turned away, and she was shrouded in shadow. But she was there. I whipped my head around to look directly, but nothing. Just an empty truck bed, exactly as it should be. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, just the quiet messing with my head. But every time I looked back at the mirror, I felt that pull, that sense that something wasn't right. About an hour later, I caught her in the mirror again, and this time I could see her clearly. She was in the back seat, sitting perfectly still, her face blank, pale as a ghost, and her eyes, they were hollow, distant, like she was looking right through me. My hands went cold on the wheel, and I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that I just needed to keep driving. But every time I glanced in the mirror, she was still there, her eyes fixed straight ahead, never blinking, never moving. I wanted to pull over, to stop and catch my breath, but some instinct kept me driving, like I knew that if I stopped, I'd be trapped with her. The urge to look in the mirror was stronger than ever, even though I knew what I'd see. It was like she was growing more real each time I looked, becoming solid, like she was just waiting. And then she spoke. I was gripping the wheel, forcing myself to look ahead, when I heard her voice. It was soft, like a whisper, but clear as day, coming from right behind me. "Take me home," she said. Her voice chilled me to the core. It was full of something I couldn't name, some mix of sorrow and desperation that made my skin crawl. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, just the faintest touch, and I couldn't help it. I swerved, almost drove off the road. I pulled over to the shoulder, my heart racing, my breath coming in gasps. When I looked in the mirror again, she was staring at me, her mouth slightly open like she was waiting for something. I knew I couldn't just leave her there, so against every instinct screaming in my head, I whispered, "Where's home?" The air around me grew colder, and I felt this strange calm settle over me, like I was no longer in control. I don't know how, but I knew exactly where to go. So I started driving again, letting her guide me deeper into the desert, down a dirt path that wasn't on any map. The road got rougher, winding through the dark like it was leading me nowhere. I kept glancing at the mirror, seeing her sitting there silent, her gaze fixed forward as if she was leading me somewhere only she knew. And then I saw it. An old, broken-down farmhouse, barely standing in the moonlight, abandoned and forgotten. The windows were shattered, the wood rotting away, but I knew this was where she wanted to go. I stopped the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked in the mirror one last time, but she was gone. The truck was empty, and in the silence I heard her voice again, just a faint whisper saying, "Thank you." The air grew warmer, lighter, and suddenly I was alone. I lost all track of time while I sat there, gaping at the farmhouse building, desperately trying to convince myself that what just happened wasn't real.
If any of these stories kept you on the edge of your seat, there's plenty more where that came from. Hit the subscribe button to enjoy more. Until next time, this is Mr. Night Shadows, signing off.